In a world where stories fade into dust, there is a place where they are kept alive. Here, in these endless halls, voices from centuries past whisper once more, and forgotten worlds open their doors to you. Welcome to Audible Archives, where every word endures and every tale finds its voice.
Before we continue, make sure you like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Audible Archives so you never lose your place in the mists. Last time, the dream awoke. A prophecy whispered through the fog. Secrets long buried began to stir, and the first threads of destiny were drawn tight. Allies were found, but trust came at a cost, and somewhere in the shifting mist, something ancient was watching. Now, in Mistwoven Legends, The Awakening Dream, chapters 6 to 8, the danger sharpens, bonds will be tested, shadows will take shape, and the prophecy will no longer wait. Written by Raul, narrated by Rob, the mists are moving, let's follow them. Chapter 6. The Council's Suspicion. Reverie sat in the quiet, sterile chamber of the council, the air thick with tension. The grand hall, with its towering obsidian pillars and soft, glowing runes, had always felt like a place of power, a place where decisions were made that shaped the fate of entire realms. Today, however, the space seemed colder, more distant, as if the very walls themselves could feel the unease in the air. The council was gathered around her, their faces illuminated by the ethereal light that pulsed from the crystalline floors. They were silent, their eyes trained on her, but there was a weight to their gaze, an underlying scrutiny that Reverie could not shake. Her heart drummed against her chest, the echoing thrum of uncertainty gnawing at her insides. "Reverie!" The head of the council, Seraphine, spoke first, her voice calm but sharp, like a blade honed to perfection. Her long silver hair shimmered in the soft light as she leaned forward, her piercing blue eyes locking onto Reverie's. "Your work has been impressive. The dream weaving you accomplished was unlike anything we have seen in recent memory." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered council members, and Reverie allowed herself a brief moment of pride. Dream weaving was a delicate and often dangerous art, one that required not only immense skill but a deep understanding of the very fabric of the dreamscape. To have achieved success, especially under such strained circumstances, was a victory she had long worked toward. Yet even as Seraphine spoke words of praise, Reverie could not ignore the subtle tension in the room. Their eyes lingered on her, their expressions unreadable, and beneath the commendation, she felt the weight of their suspicion. The faintest trace of discomfort flickered across Seraphine's face, as though she was carefully choosing each word she spoke. Reverie's instincts screamed that something was wrong, that the praise was not as genuine as it seemed. "But," Seraphine continued, her tone shifting ever so slightly, as if preparing to cut into a tender wound, "there are certain anomalies in your work, things we have observed, things that we cannot ignore." A chill ran down Reverie's spine. Anomalies. She had been careful, hadn't she? The dreamscape had been stabilized, if only temporarily, by the very force she had once fought so desperately to control. There had been no immediate signs of corruption, no catastrophic fallout, and yet Seraphine's words struck like a cold gust of wind, sweeping away any semblance of calm. "Anomalies?" Reverie echoed, her voice steady, but her hands betrayed her, trembling ever so slightly beneath the table. "What do you mean, Counselor?" Seraphine's gaze never wavered. "There is a subtle undercurrent to your work, Reverie, a lingering presence that we cannot ignore. We have detected traces of abyssal influence within the dreamscape you crafted. It is faint, almost imperceptible to most, but it is there. The very energy you've used to stabilize the realm bears the mark of the abyss." Reverie's breath caught in her throat. The abyss. The dark, insidious force that had first threatened to tear apart the dreamscape was now connected to her success. She had known, deep down, that the line between controlling it and being consumed by it was thin, but to have the council speak of it so bluntly, so openly, it struck her to the core. I did not allow the abyss to take hold," Reverie protested, her voice rising with urgency. "I only used its energy to stabilize the dreamscape. I controlled it, carefully. Control is the very issue, Reverie," interrupted Councillor Thalor, his voice low but tinged with authority. His angular features were sharp, and his eyes gleamed with suspicion. He had always been one of the most wary of the council, his cynicism rooted in years of experience with forces far darker than the dreamscape. The abyss does not play by the same rules as other energies. It is a force that cannot simply be wielded without consequences. Even the faintest trace of its influence is dangerous. Reverie clenched her fists beneath the table, trying to calm the storm that raged within her. I understand the dangers, Thalor. I've seen the consequences of the Abyss's power firsthand. I would never allow it to take hold of me or of the dreamscape. But her words fell flat in the face of their skepticism. The Council had always been cautious, always kept a careful distance from forces they could not fully control. Reverie had never before felt this level of scrutiny from them, and it stung deeply. She had always believed they were allies, that they understood her dedication to the balance between worlds. Yet now, with the Abyss on the fringes, it seemed as though they were questioning everything she had worked for. There are whispers, Councillor Miriam spoke up, her voice softer than the others but no less stern. Her long dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders, her expression thoughtful but grave. We have sensed it. Subtle changes in the dreamscape, disturbances that cannot be explained. It is as if the very fabric of the realm has been marked. Miriam's words sent a ripple of unease through Reverie. She had sensed it too, but had hoped it was merely a side effect of her own work. She had hoped it would fade, that the corruption would dissipate as the dreamscape stabilized. But now it seemed as though the Council was seeing something far darker than what she had hoped. I never intended for the Abyss to leave its mark, Reverie said, her voice now trembling despite her efforts to keep it steady. I did everything I could to control the energy to ensure it would not linger. But you must understand, the abyssal force was never fully contained. It was there beneath the surface. I only sought to use it, to bend it to my will for the greater good. Seraphine's eyes softened slightly, but there was still a glimmer of caution in her gaze. We understand your intent, Reverie, we truly do, but we must be vigilant. You have already walked a fine line, and you risk losing your way. The Abyss is not a tool to be wielded, it is a corrupting force that warps all it touches. Even the smallest thread can unravel everything. The weight of her words hung heavy in the room, and Reverie felt the walls of her resolve begin to crack. She had known the risks. She had always known the dangers of the Abyss, but now, faced with the Council's suspicion, the fear of failure pressed in on her like a vice. I will not let it consume me, Reverie said, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. I can control it. I must. Miriam's eyes narrowed slightly, her voice low and cautious. That is what we fear, Reverie, that belief that you can control it. You must tread carefully. The Abyss is not a force to be tamed. If you continue down this path, you risk not only your own soul, but the very fabric of the dreamscape itself. And should you fall, we may not be able to save you. A heavy silence followed. Reverie's breath was shallow, her mind racing. The Abyss was not something that could be easily dismissed, nor was it a force that could be ignored. It was tempting, powerful, seductive in its promise of strength and control, but the Council's warning was clear. Even the faintest connection to it could unravel everything she had fought for. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The weight of their suspicion, of their concern, settled like a stone in her chest. They were right to be wary, perhaps more so than she had ever imagined, but there was something else gnawing at her, something that none of them seemed to understand. In her search for control, for balance, had she gone too far? Had she inadvertently invited the very force she sought to tame into her soul? I will tread carefully, Reverie finally said, her voice quieter now, tinged with uncertainty. I promise you that. Seraphine nodded, her expression unreadable. We will be watching, Reverie. Be mindful of your path. As the council session came to a close, Reverie rose from her seat, her mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. Their words had shaken her more than she cared to admit. They were right to be cautious, but was their suspicion truly warranted? Or was it simply fear of the unknown, of a power that could not be fully understood? She exited the chamber with a heavy heart, her every step echoing in the hollow silence of the council's halls. The dreamscape awaited her, its fractured form a reflection of the turmoil within. And with every passing moment, the Abyss seemed to call to her more insistently, its whispers louder in her mind. As Reverie walked away from the council, she knew one thing for certain: the path ahead would not be easy. But whether it led to salvation or damnation, she would face it on her own terms. Chapter 7. The Abyss Beckons. The air in the dreamscape had grown heavier, thick with the weight of unspoken things. Reverie's every step seemed to echo in the silence, her movements sharp and deliberate, as if each one was calculated to avoid drawing attention. She had always been careful, always made sure that her work was precise, controlled, and under the council's watchful eye. But now, in the quiet darkness of her private study, she no longer cared to tread the narrow path they had laid out for her. The abyss had begun to consume her thoughts in ways that terrified her. Every moment of peace, every fleeting moment of quiet was shattered by the whispers, the calls that rose from the depths of her mind like an insidious tide. She had tried to ignore them, to push them aside with rationality and discipline, but now they were impossible to dismiss. The more she resisted, the louder the calls became. It was as though the abyss had taken root inside her, winding its tendrils into her very soul. She stood at the center of the study, her hands trembling as she gazed down at the carefully arranged fragments on the table before her. Each one was a shard of raw abyssal energy, tiny pieces of the darkness that had invaded the dreamscape. She had collected them in secret, drawn to their unnatural power as if compelled by something far beyond her control. The council had warned her against it, warned her that even the faintest trace of the abyss could corrupt everything. But the allure was undeniable, and the temptation to understand its true nature, to bend it to her will, had become too great to resist. Reverie exhaled sharply, steadying herself. She had to be careful. She had to be precise. One misstep, one moment of weakness, and the consequences could be disastrous. Yet, even as she reminded herself of the dangers, her fingers itched to touch the fragments before her, to delve deeper into the mystery of their power. The fragments were small, jagged pieces of energy, pulsing faintly with an unsettling glow. They were dangerous, she knew this, but there was something about them, something that felt like a hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. They were raw, unrefined, chaotic. Yet within their chaos, Reverie sensed the possibility of something greater, something that could change everything. She extended her hand, her fingers hovering just above the fragments. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if urging her to take the next step. Reverie closed her eyes, took a steadying breath, and allowed herself to slip into the trance-like state she had cultivated for her dream weaving. The world around her softened, faded, until all that remained was the pulsing energy in front of her. As her fingers brushed against the first fragment, the room seemed to shift. A rush of power flooded through her, swirling around her like a vortex of energy. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she felt a surge of exhilaration, raw, unfiltered power coursing through her veins. She could feel the dreamscape bending beneath her, shifting, responding to her will. For a fleeting instant she was invincible, her power limitless. But with that power came something else, a whisper, a voice deep and guttural emanating from the abyss itself. It was a cold, mocking sound, filled with an ancient malice that made her skin crawl. "You think you control me, little dreamweaver. You are mine now. There is no escape." Reverie recoiled, her heart hammering in her chest. She quickly pulled her hand away from the fragment, but the lingering sensation of the abyss clung to her like a shadow. Her pulse raced as the voice echoed in her mind, its presence undeniable, inescapable. She stumbled backward, trying to regain her composure. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her hands trembling with the residual energy. She had felt it. She had felt the true nature of the abyss, its cold, unyielding grip. It wasn't just a force of power, it was a presence, a living, breathing entity that sought to devour everything in its path. For a moment, she wondered if it had been a mistake to touch the fragment, to let it so close. She had felt the abyss awaken inside her, a flicker of something dark and hungry, something that called to her from the deepest recesses of her mind. And yet, despite the fear that clenched her heart, there was a part of her that reveled in it. That part, buried deep beneath her resolve, wanted more. It wanted to push further, to explore the boundaries of this new power. What if she could control it? What if she could harness the abyss and wield its might as a weapon? No, she forced the thought away, but it lingered in the back of her mind, a tantalizing temptation she could not easily dismiss. The abyss was not something to be controlled. It was something to be feared, something that could consume her. But the question remained, what if controlling it was the only way to save the dreamscape, to protect everything she loved? She stood there for a long moment, trying to steady her breath, trying to regain her equilibrium. The whispers had quieted, but the remnants of the energy still lingered in the room, pulsing with a dark, seductive rhythm. Reverie clenched her fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms as she struggled to push back the rising tide of temptation. Her thoughts spiraled. The abyss was dangerous, yes, but it was also powerful. The fragments had shown her that much. And yet, with each passing moment, the connection between herself and the abyss seemed to grow stronger. It wasn't just the energy that called to her, it was something deeper, something more personal. The abyss had left a mark on her soul, one that could not be erased, no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. She took a step back from the table, her mind racing. The vision she had seen, the dark, swirling depth of the abyss, had been vivid, more real than any dream she had ever woven. She could feel it now, like a dark pulse beneath her skin, as though the abyss itself was calling to her, urging her to return. A sudden, intense feeling of vertigo gripped her, and Reverie stumbled, barely catching herself against the edge of the table. The room seemed to tilt, the walls bending and warping in ways that made her head spin. The dreamscape, her creation, began to unravel around her, the delicate threads of reality slipping through her fingers. The abyss was no longer something distant, something she could control from a distance. It was inside her, intertwining with her very essence, wrapping its cold fingers around her heart. She gasped, her mind reeling as the world around her began to shift, the dreamscape folding in on itself like a collapsing star. Reverie struggled to stay anchored to the present, to hold on to her connection to the dreamscape. But the abyss was stronger than she had anticipated. She could feel it consuming the room, twisting reality, warping the very fabric of the world she had fought so hard to protect. In that moment, Reverie realized the truth. The abyss was not something she could control. It was not something that could be contained. It was a force of pure entropy, a darkness that would consume everything in its path, and no amount of willpower or restraint could keep it at bay forever. With a gasp, Reverie jerked herself from the trance, stumbling backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The room snapped back into focus, the disorienting pull of the abyss subsiding. She looked down at her hands, her fingers still trembling from the residual energy. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, but the connection to the abyss had been severed for now. But the warning was clear. The abyss was not something to be trifled with. It was not a power to be wielded. It was a hunger, a void that would consume everything in its path, including her. Reverie stood frozen, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She had felt the abyss call to her, felt its pull with every fiber of her being. The question now lingered unanswered. Was she strong enough to resist its pull, or had she already crossed a line from which there was no return? The abyss beckoned, and she could feel its call deep in her soul. Chapter 8. A Second Trial. Reverie stood at the threshold of the dreamscape, the soft hum of power beneath her feet grounding her. The dream was already unfolding around her, stretching out like an unfamiliar landscape, its colors distorted, its edges jagged. She could feel the pulse of the dream world, the heartbeat of a reality on the brink of collapse, but this time it was different. It wasn't just the dreamscape that was unstable, it was her own mind. A new request had come through, a child trapped in a recurring nightmare. The dream was eating away at them night after night, its relentless pull driving them to the brink of madness. Reverie had been assigned to resolve it, to weave a path for the child through their nightmare and restore peace to their restless mind. But the nightmare was not the only thing pressing on her mind. As Reverie ventured deeper into the dreamscape, she felt the abyss stirring in the depths of her consciousness. It was there again, lurking in the corners of her thoughts, whispering, promising, always promising. You need not struggle, Dreamweaver. A swift solution lies within me. You know that. You know how easily I could end this. Reverie clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms. She had felt this pull before, felt the whisper of the abyss, felt its insidious lure of power and control. It was tempting, so tempting. She had already used its energy once to stabilize the dreamscape after its near collapse. Now, as the nightmare threatened to consume another soul, the abyss's promise felt like the easiest path. But the council had been clear, no more. They had warned her, instructed her not to use its energy again, not unless it was absolutely necessary. This was her trial, a chance to prove to herself and to them that she could handle the responsibility, that she could face these challenges without succumbing to the abyss. And yet, every step she took deeper into the dreamscape, the whispers grew louder. You cannot save them with mere illusions. You cannot restore peace with your feeble dreams. Only I can give you the power you need. Only I can make you the savior you long to be. Her breath quickened, her body tensing with the effort to ignore it. She had to remain strong. She had to prove to herself that she could solve this nightmare without relying on the corrupting pull of the abyss. This was her trial, her test. If she failed now, if she gave in to the abyss, she would lose everything. Her feet carried her deeper into the nightmare, the landscape twisting around her, the colors shifting like liquid, the sky dark and cracked, as if the very heavens were in agony. The child's distress was palpable. Reverie could feel it in the air like a storm just waiting to break. She pressed on, determined to reach the source of the nightmare. The child, a small figure no older than 7, stood in the center of the storm, trapped in the heart of the nightmare. The child's eyes were wide with terror, their small hands clutching their head as if trying to keep the nightmare from consuming them. It was a swirling vortex of shadow and distortion, a cacophony of fear and chaos. Reverie approached the child, kneeling down in front of them, trying to make her presence known. "I'm here to help," she said softly, her voice calm and soothing, though her insides twisted with the strain of the abyss's whispers. The child flinched, looking up at her with tear-filled eyes. "I'm scared. It's always the same. It won't stop." Reverie nodded, offering a gentle smile. "I know, but you're not alone. We're going to fix this together. Just stay with me. We'll face it, I promise." She reached out, trying to establish a connection with the child's mind. The dream was fragmented, unstable, full of jagged edges and broken paths. It would be difficult to guide the child through it without disturbing the dream further. Reverie could feel the tremor of anxiety in her own chest. The abyss's whispers were louder now, their promises sharper, more insistent. "You're wasting time. You know what I can offer. One small fragment, and this nightmare could end. You don't have to struggle. You don't have to fight. You can end it now." Reverie's breath hitched, her focus wavering for just a moment. The child's terrified eyes locked onto hers, waiting for reassurance. She couldn't give in. She couldn't let the abyss take control, not this time. With a surge of will, Reverie pushed the whispers aside, drawing on the calm that had always been her strength. She focused on the dream's core, its structure, the weave of its being. The child's nightmare was not something that could be fixed with raw power. It needed a gentle touch, an understanding of the child's deepest fears and anxieties. "You have to trust me," Reverie said, her voice low but firm. "This isn't your fault. You don't have to face this alone." The dream around them began to shift as Reverie carefully untangled the threads of fear. She reached out, weaving a path through the nightmare, guiding the child toward safety, toward the light that flickered at the edges of the dream. It was slow, painstaking work, and every second felt like an eternity. The abyss was right there, just behind her thoughts, its whispers curling like smoke around her consciousness. "You waste your energy on this weak child. I could do it in an instant. You will never escape me. You cannot fight your true nature." But Reverie refused to listen. She had been down that path before, had let the abyss creep into her thoughts, had trusted in its promises of power. But she had learned something the last time she faced it. That kind of strength came at a price, and she was not willing to pay that price again. She took a deep breath, centering herself, and pressed on. The child's cries of fear began to subside as the nightmare shifted, the shadowy tendrils of darkness receding before her steady hand. The child's grip on their head loosened, their face softening as they began to understand, to trust in the power of the dream weaver. "You're safe," Reverie murmured, her voice a soothing balm against the chaos that still raged around them. "You're safe now." Slowly, the nightmare began to dissolve, the fragments of darkness dissolving like smoke in the air, leaving behind a peaceful landscape. The child blinked up at Reverie, their eyes now filled with wonder rather than fear. "Thank you," the child whispered, their voice small but filled with gratitude. Reverie smiled, her heart lifting as the nightmare faded entirely. The child was free, their torment finally over. But even as the dreamscape settled into peace, the abyss's presence still lingered, its whispers faint but insistent. "You've done well, Reverie, but you know you could have done it faster. You know you could have ended it sooner if you had listened to me." Reverie's heart raced. The child was safe, but her battle with the abyss was far from over. The whispers were still there, still circling in her mind, waiting for her to falter. She took a steadying breath, focusing on the child's face one last time, feeling the weight of her decision. She had chosen the harder path, the right path. She had resisted the abyss, refused its power. And though it had cost her time, though it had made the trial more difficult, it had been worth it. She would not be tempted by the abyss's promises again, not today. Reverie stepped back, watching as the child faded from the dreamscape, safe and sound. The nightmare was gone. The child was free. And yet, the abyss still whispered. The deeper we go, the harder it is to tell what's real and what's only the dream. You've just heard chapters 6 to 8 of Mistwoven Legends, The Awakening Dream, an Audible Archives original, written by Raul and narrated by Rob. If this journey has you hooked, like, comment, and subscribe. The next part holds answers and dangers neither of us are ready for. The dream is calling and it knows your name.
Another chapter closes, but the archives remain, waiting for the next seeker of stories. Here, no voice is lost, no tale truly ends. This is Audible Archives, Until we meet again, may your mind wander freely and your heart never forget the stories we share.